Alrighty. So yeah, awesome. Thank you everyone for sharing. It's cool to see when people have some of these lenses already, because most of the people that I talk to are just getting into this world, and so there's often times, and it could still be true for all of you as well, where uh, I can simply change one word in something that they said, and it completely changes everything for them. I've had people had their minds blown just by changing one word. And that's without them having the context of like, yeah, like the things that we're doing, the things that we're saying, how we're communicating, like it's all being influenced, and it's all exchange of energy. And so I found that while language can be very limiting, and that is something important to remember as well. Is it Taima? Is that how you pronounce it?
Tama, but it's
Tama.
fine.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I like to make sure that pronouncing right. So yeah, Tama, you were saying, um, it's like you could feel the energy behind it, but you couldn't quite like put it into words, right? And that's totally fine. There's going to be so many things that we experience in our lives that you just cannot put words to. I think it was Alan Watts. Um, if you're not familiar with him, he's got some really fun stuff out there to look at or look into. He talks about, we as humans, we're trying to describe what consciousness is, for instance. And the reality of it is, like, we can't describe it because it's not words. And so we're doing the best that we can trying to put words to something. And so while understanding that, on the flip side of that is that, like, yeah, our words do influence us. Our language does influence us. So we might as well accept that and be with that. And then, we can learn, like, cool, how can we use this to best serve us? How can we use this to empower us? And so I know there's a lot of stuff that we've gone over in the master key that I imagine will, if it hasn't connected already for you guys, maybe it'll connect on another level just through this conversation. And then, yeah, the other thing I want to mention, at any point in time, if you want to chime in, just if you want to just raise your hand, I would love to hear what you have to say. I found that a lot of these conversations are more enjoyable and more fun when it's a conversation instead of me just talking at you. So if something pops up, by all means, like I said, you can unmute yourself to chime in, or if you want to put it in the chat box, feel free to. Okay. Um, so yeah, language can be constricting or it can be expansive, right? And so understanding that, like we've already talked about, like certain words carry certain energy. And so one of the rabbit holes that I've been down, um, Tama, was like you were just saying, is like find the origins of some of these words. And when I was on my call with Annie a couple weeks ago, we were talking a little bit about this. And so something as simple as choosing different words. And so the one that I brought up in particular was decide versus choice. And so if you were to look at decide, right, if you look at the origin or the root word of side, CIDE, and you look at some of the other words that are associated with that, which is homicide, suicide, um, and I can't remember what the other one was. If I remember, I'll mention it. But it's, that root word side means to like end or to kill off. Um, and so like the difference between saying like, oh, well, I need to decide on this thing versus like, oh, hey, I get to make a choice about this next genocide. Yep, there's another good one. And so like even in something as simple as that, like as we start to fine tune our experience, it's understanding that, like, yeah, you can choose to say different words, right? You can choose to alter your language in a way that best serves you. And so I know for me, as I started learning more about language, like that was one of the biggest things. I was like, oh man, like we're subconsciously, our language can be holding us back, right? And so I'm going to briefly mention some of the stuff that I've been doing, and then I'm actually going to have you guys do a little exercise, which is really fun. But just along those lines, one of my mentors, his name's Mark England. So if you ever want to look at his stuff, him and his business partner came up with this program. It's called Procabulary, and I could send you guys some of the information. But they've been on this language train for about the last 12 to 15 years, and what they found was, especially in the English language, and I'm super curious the more I talk about this, like those that do speak another language, like how much this resonates with them as well, and they were essentially able to break it down to three pillars of what we call conflict language. And so we have conflict language and archetype language. Conflict language is going to be stuff that's going to be more keeping us stuck in survival mode. It's also known as the victim mentality. They actually shifted that language though, because when people hear something like victim mentality, it can be very triggering and very off-putting. And so instead, we now call it conflict language. Versus the other side, which is archetype language, which is going to be language that is going to propel you forward. It's going to put you into creation as opposed to survival. And then it's very empowering. And so those three pillars are, you have soft talk versus solid talk, you have negations and affirmations, and then you have projections and reflections. So we're going to go a little bit more in depth with that um, here in a little bit. We're going to back it up though. So another thing that I found to be very powerful with language and really just our experience is that we can gain more accuracy with what's really going on in our experience. And so language is one of the ways that we can do that. And so has anyone here ever heard of circling? It's like the circling method, and it's a communication course. Eric, you have?
Like the group circling,
Yeah, so
or
it's
is it
called this,
different?
it's called the Circling Institute, I think.
Oh, then probably not.
Cool. So circling, it's a really interesting and powerful it's basically like a program or a method to help people communicate and to build more connection with each other. And so while that was the intended basis of what they were doing, what we have found, or what I have found in a couple of people that I've worked with and mentors and such, is that it actually extends well beyond the communication side of things, or at least like that, or the connection side of things. And so the way that they break it down is you have three categories, right? There's going to be things that you notice. So the things that we notice are the things that, for the most part, are going to be inarguable. And so, like, having gone down the rabbit hole of like you can argue anything, or like, what is time, what is reality, stuff like that, which can be really fun. Uh, back on planet Earth, where it's like, okay, let's use the confines that we have, or the constructs that we have, and so it's going to be mostly inarguable. And so another way to think about it is like, okay, 999 times out of 1,000 people would most likely agree with you. And so the things that we can notice, you can keep it super simple. Like, I notice this tree, I notice there's trees behind me, I notice the grass, I notice my computer, I notice this table, right? Like, if you were to see what I was seeing, right, everyone would be like, oh yeah. So like, if I were to look at Lucy's window, for instance, I can be like, oh, I notice her blinds, I notice her hair, I notice what else can I notice? I notice she's wearing clothing, right? Like, we can make it even that simple, because I don't know exactly what she's wearing. I say, oh, I noticed she's wearing a t-shirt, but someone's like, oh no, that looks more like a sweatshirt. And someone else could say like, oh no, it looks more like this. Right. And so what we've found is that oftentimes, like, we take a stance on something, for instance, right? And these would be the things that we think we notice, when in reality there's ambiguity there. And so we wonder why there's so much internal stuff, right? And this can be or I'm sorry, there's so much struggle at times. This could be internal struggle, or this could be with another person, right? And so when we talk about the things that we notice, we want to be as specific as possible, and and leave whatever else we can out of it, right? So typically I would even say, like, if so this is an exercise to put into more perspective, that when I work with clients, something that I'll have them do. And so we'll put a timer on for 2 minutes, and you simply talk about things that you notice, right? And I'll actually, we'll do this. We'll do a small version of this with you guys, because it's fun. But yeah, so the things that we notice, they're going to be mostly inarguable, right? Colors, I tend to stay away from. Like temperature, right? Something that to someone it might look one way, and to another person it might look another way, and so it can be very challenging. Um, so that's the first category. The second category is going to be the things that we imagine, right? And so our imagination, I actually, we'll do this. When I say imagination, what comes to mind? Like, what do you think of when you think of your imagination? And same thing, you could type it in the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself, by all means do so. And these are all right answers, by the way. It's impossible to get this wrong.
When I hear the word imagination, I just imagine the space in my head between my eyes and that little like showroom we have, and
Mhm.
then things just popping up there.
Very cool. Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
When you said imagination, I instantly looked down and saw some like brown fabric, and I more just thought looking at something and making it something else within my imagination.
Love that. What's up, Eric?
I thought about when you said that, just creating different scenarios in your mind
Mm-hmm.
and playing those out.
Yep. Love it. What you got, Grace? Looks like you're reaching.
Pretty similar to what Tima said, like any image that like you've ever seen, or any like a memory, or like it's almost like a like glasses or something. You can look at something and alter it with any of those memories, or I don't know, yeah, kind of a combination of what everyone said.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. Taya, anything come up for you?
I think of like storytelling.
Hmm.
Like when you imagine things as a kid or now, there's plenty of things I imagine.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you. I was hoping somebody would bring up children. So, yeah, that's yeah. Who here has seen a child, right? Especially a younger child, right? 3, 4, 5, 6, and they're just off living in their own world. They're creating whatever they want. Like they're fighting dragons, or they're playing doctor, or they're a veterinarian, or right, they're a superhero. And like they'll just look at something and be like, oh, you know what? This is my crown. Here we go. And then they just take off and they go do their thing. Right. And so, yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Taya. So yeah, those are all great answers. I love it. And I'll give you some, another lens in which you can view it from. And so our imagination, to me, as I like really start to get more accurate with what my experience of it is, the imagination encompasses pretty much everything that we cannot prove to be true. And so through that lens, and that's how I've been viewing it, um, through that lens, what I've noticed is that most of our time is spent in our imagination. And so the reason why I find this to be super important is like if we think of children, right? A child says something and they make something up, right? And as a parent or as an adult, it's very easy to like take what they're saying and be like, "Oh, that's so cute." Like, I'm not going to be mad at you, right? But then when we do it as adults, way different story, right? And so if we look at our imagination through that lens of like, okay, let's just assume that it encompasses most, if not everything, that we cannot prove to be true. The way this affects our communication all of a sudden starts to shift things, right? Because the top two things that you'll hear that'll let you know when someone's in their imagination is I think and I feel like, right? And so this is where like, the actual words within the language can affect things, right? Because in a different language, like for me, for instance, I don't know what like I feel like would translate into, right? And so through the English language, we can understand a little bit better. And so the reason why that's important is because the third category is the things that we feel, right? And so like as we gain accuracy on what feelings are versus what isn't, we can start to discern and separate and navigate communication in a different way. And so if we go back to the imagination part for a second, yeah, if like viewing it through the lens of like, okay, I understand that someone's in their imagination when they say things like I think and I feel like, all of a sudden when you communicate with someone, this changes the dynamic. And so one of the top ways to view this, or that I help people see this through, is like through the lens of partnership or relationship, right? So those tend to be like some of the more charged areas of our lives where emotions get brought up, for instance, or like there's an opportunity for growth and all that fun stuff, or for just resistance in general. And so like through communication, like who here has ever had someone tell them, I feel like you're not listening, or like I feel like you don't care, right? Has everyone had something like that said to them before, right? Or been the one that's been saying it, like, you know what, I feel like you're just not listening to me, right? And so we can start to understand why conflict can arise so quickly, right? Because as a feeling, right? So we'll jump into feelings again real quick. Feelings are inarguable. Like you cannot argue what a feeling is, because it is different to everybody. We have some crossover. We have some understanding of some of these emotions, for instance, that we can uh, we can really imagine that we all know what that feels like. If I were to say I feel happy, for instance, most people would understand, like, cool, I have a general idea of what it's like to feel happy, right? But at the same time, like, I don't know what that really feels like for anybody on this call, or for any of you, right? My level of happiness and what I feel as happiness may be way different for every individual here. And so when we look at it through this lens and we're trying to communicate, all of a sudden when someone says, I feel like you're not listening, okay, cool. Well, as the person receiving that, I hear the word feel. I understand that I can't argue that feeling. I can't be like, you're not mad. Like, uh, that's, I'm in no way, like, no position to be able to say something like that. So if someone says, I feel like you're not listening, I automatically take that as like, oh, they're talking about a feeling. I can't argue this. Now all of a sudden I'm going to start to shrink back potentially, or I'm going to get defensive, because it's the way that's landing, right? It's like what we talked about earlier, where it's like the language that we're using is conveying energy. And so if we can get more accurate, right, we can start to navigate those situations a little bit better. And so as an example, right, if you were to sit with, if someone said, I feel like you're not listening to me, right? If you were to sit with that and be like, okay, how would I take that? How does that feel for me? Versus what if that same person in the same situation says, hey, you know what? I imagine you're not listening to me right now. Right? Does that land differently for everybody? Like even just in that brief mentioning of it. Because, right, like we just talked about, when we think of our imagination, right, if we were to think about kids, like it's easy to be like, oh yeah, they're in their imagination, that's cute. Obviously as an adult, we wouldn't approach it that way. However, if someone did say something along those lines of like, hey, I imagine you're not listening to me, now you have feedback, right? And so this is something that Ryan talks about in the Master Key, is like we're constantly getting feedback, right? So that could be on a macro level, or it could be on a micro level. And so when we get that feedback, all of a sudden we can now approach the situation in maybe a better way, in a less confrontational way. Because if I'm receiving that, cool, this person's saying that their experience of me is that I'm not listening. Oh, cool, well, that's not accurate. What can I do to show them that I am listening, right? And so now a conversation can be had, for instance, instead of, oh, I feel like you're not listening to me. Now all of a sudden the chances of that leading to an argument now just went up. So like even just through these lenses, we can see how important, or like how much of an impact that can have on our communication. And right. And then the way that we communicate is also going to affect the way that we connect with others. Right. And so the same language can be causing us to keep people at arm's length instead of inviting them in. And so yeah, that's just a small example, one of my favorite ones to use. And then so to close the loop on the feeling stuff, to gain some more context around that, the way that I view feelings anymore is that it's the physical sensations that we're present to, and then in the beginning, emotions as well. right? So if we were to talk about feelings being like happiness, sadness, anger, stuff like that, most people across the world would have some resonance with that. I feel happy, I feel sad, I feel anger, right? Even though we know like, okay, cool, that means something different to everybody, we still have enough of an idea to be like, okay, yeah, I understand at least something of what they're going through. It's the same thing with like facial expressions, right? Across the world, like a smile is known. Like smiles, are quote unquote good things, or that they're feeling a certain way. Frowns mean a different thing. And so with feelings in the beginning, like I said, we will incorporate emotions into that. As you start to peel back the layers, though, what you'll find is feelings really are it's the physical sensations that we are present to. And so the more that we narrow it down to that, the more that things can really start to change. And so, for instance, a line of work that I do in the emotional world, we help people move through like past traumas and old stories by simply getting them to feel. And in the beginning, that's like, oh, I feel anger, for instance, right? And so it's like, cool, where do you feel that anger? Right. And so if you ask yourself a simple question like that, you can start to tune into the body, because the body's already giving us signs that something is going to happen or something's coming up. It's just that we're failing to tune into it. And so the more that we can tune into it, the more accurate we can get with our experience. So it's like for some people, they might feel anger in their chest. For some people, they might feel that in their stomach, for instance. I know for me, like a lot of my anger was like carried in my shoulders, and then like I would get this like hot sensation go over, like starting with my arms. And so it's like, okay, cool. Now that I understand more of what's really going on with feelings, I can change the story, right? And I know this was mentioned a little bit earlier, is like our imagination can create stories. And so now instead of I'm angry, right? Because that carries a certain energy with it. Now that conversation can be like, oh man, I'm really present to this tightness and this heat in my chest, right? And it's usually what we're feeling at a physical sense that we attach stories to, right? And so this is how like we're painting this umbrella of what our language is doing, right? And storytelling is an amazing form of communication, right? We see it in every culture in some way, shape, or form. So it's like cool understanding, right? I imagine everyone on this call knows, and anybody listening, it's like cool, like the things that we're saying affect the way that we feel. The way that we feel affects the things that we say, and so we can see how we can easily get caught in one of those loops. So it's like cool, I'm in this loop. What can I do to change this story, right? And so it's like looking at language to be able to do that. So like that one, like I said, it's from the circling method. So if you were to look it up, like they do seminars and whatnot, their main focus though is communication and connection through that sense. And so like when we expand that bubble though, we can start looking at it from more of a macro level. You can start to see how it's really influencing everything around us. And so yeah, anybody got any questions or comments on any of that stuff so far?
I had a couple of comments or ideas.
Cool.
It seems like the circling method, one thing that does is really helps you to like ground into your body in like the present moment, instead of like being off in your head, or like maybe there's just like a lack of like communication and connection with other people, because you're not, I don't know, relaying your like experience in the moment. You're just like telling stories.
Yep.
If you're not doing the circling method.
Yep. Yeah. 100%. I mean, that's so another thing that I do in my coaching is it's called story work. And so it's from the same guy that started down the language route. Like he started to notice like, okay, cool. Like there's something to this whole story thing. And so to me, I've even made the connection, right? Like we've talked a lot about belief work, right? Going through the master key. To me, beliefs can also be seen as stories, right? And so it's like understanding through that same lens is like, cool, I can at any point in time choose to create a new story, right? I can rewrite a story. And so it's like rewriting it in a way towards empowering, for instance, instead of constricting, right? Like we've all had plenty of limiting beliefs that Ryan helped us see. And it's like, cool, like this is the story that we're telling ourselves. Well, does that serve you? No? Great. Like, how can we narrow this down and whittle this away into, a belief or a story that is serving? And so, yeah, the circling method, it gets you out of that headspace and can bring you back down, into the body. And then from there, it's like, cool, now we can have more accurate communication, or now we can be more present with each other, right? And this is some of the stuff that I don't think they go as like deep into, right? Like with the circling method, which is really cool because it's like, yeah, we need a surface level thing to get people, started on the conversation. If we just started blasting people with like, oh, like language is energy and we're exchanging this and doing that, like a lot of people be like, whoa, wait a minute, what are you talking about? So yeah, great observation, Eric. Grace, did
And
you have
then
something? Oh, go ahead.
okay. Oh, one other thing was when you were talking about, I feel like you're not listening to me
Mhm.
versus like, I imagine you're not listening to me. There's almost like it's almost like you mentioned, like it was like incorrect, or you're not describing it well, because I'm not feeling like you're not listening to me. I feel like some uncomfortable energy, and I imagine you're not listening to, because I imagine you're not listening to me.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. That's that's the fun one right there that can really, I mean, it just help people shift out of certain states, but then also on that communication level, like the amount of uncomfortable conversations that I've been able to have since like applying how I communicate through that lens. And then the feedback that I get from people are like, thank you for like making this super simple for me. I'm like, yeah, like we're just trying to find accuracy here. That's all. It's like, cool. If you're upset, you're upset. Right. But like, just say that I'm upset. Like when you like, this thing happened, I feel sad. This thing happened, I feel upset. Instead of it's like, oh, it's your fault, or because you did that thing, whatever. And we're going to get a little bit more into like the projections versus reflections. But yeah, good observation there, Eric.
Yeah, it seems like when you are like very accurate with how you speak, and then it reminds me of like the nonviolent communication kind of ideas, but this almost like simplified it a little bit. It's like if I say everything that's like just my experience and what I'm thinking, then it's like the other person doesn't feel like misunderstood, and there isn't that like conflict.
Yep. Yeah, I love nonviolent communication. I love the framework that they give for people, and at the same time, it can also feel very robotic. Because it's like, here's my script. I know it works. I know, and it's great. Like, especially in the beginning, it's a great way to communicate. Hey, this is my experience, right? This is how I feel. What is your experience of me after hearing that? Like, like it's a great way to learn it. And then it does get to a point where it's like, okay, this feels very robotic. And so you can make it even more human by saying like, this is what happened. I feel this way. Damn. So yeah, for anyone that hasn't, Nonviolent Communication is a great book to read. Cool. Grace, did you have something?
Yeah. So I'm trying to define for myself, like, or that's why I'm curious your take on this. Like, what's the distinction then between like your beliefs and your imagination, and yeah, how do they relate?
Ooh, great question. Beliefs and imagination. What comes to mind is that your beliefs will shape your imagination, for one. And so like just understanding like, okay, cool. If I have certain beliefs, that's going to shape how, like the types of things that I think about or how I think about certain things. On the reverse side, the imagination affecting beliefs. Yeah, I would say, at least at this point, that it does start with the beliefs first, right? So that's like your foundation. And then based off of what your belief system is, or the stories that you tell yourself, that's going to then influence your imagination. And it could also work. So I will take some of that back in regards to like, yeah, your imagination can also influence your beliefs. And so, for instance, the more that you go out and experience, right, the more context that you have of the world, the more the more context through the lens, through the lens of like what's really going on here, right? And so like one of the words that I like to use is like gaining accuracy, right? So it's like, okay, if I've lived in this box, right, that's going to shape what I think and how I think, right? But as my box gets bigger, it's going to then change. Like, cool, I now have more experiences that I can draw from. I've met more people. I've heard more stories. So now my imagination is broader. okay, cool. So through that lens, like if I can broaden my imagination, I can also broaden my belief system, or I can gain more accuracy on my beliefs through that lens. Um, what comes to mind, for instance, is go ahead, Tama.
No, I don't mean to cut you off.
Oh, you're good.
I just had I felt like while you were talking, I imagined with Grace's question that a belief is like the glasses that you wear, and imagination is the things you are seeing inside the glasses, like the tree that looks maybe scary, which is not, if you remove the glasses, the tree is actually just a tree or something like that. Like I feel like that's how I'm imagining it. It is in fact the lens.
Yeah, that's Eric.
Yeah, I thought the same way as Tama. Is that your beliefs like shape your imagination. So if you have limiting beliefs, you can only imagine like a certain outcome basically, and it's going to be like a more disempowering outcome. So I think, yeah, beliefs will control like the energy or what's like channeled through you and like what you can potentially imagine. Because if you think like if you believe a situation is going to go poorly and someone's going to react poorly, like that's what you're going to imagine. It's going to be hard for you to imagine like a situation where it could be like a positive outcome or it'll be like a fine outcome. So
Yeah, and also to add, like, yeah, I appreciate what you both said. Like, I'm thinking the one way that imagination could go the other way potentially is when like you don't have in mind like specific words for a belief, or you're like, I want to change this, but you don't know what to change it to, and so maybe that's when the imagination comes in kind of like filling that like void in a sense and creating something new.
Yeah, that's those are great. Thank you guys for chiming in for one. I love it when we have group interaction. And Grace, yeah, I am seeing a little bit of what you're seeing in that as well, because another thing to look at the imagination or another way that we can view our imagination is like that's where we can go to create, right? So if we can go in, like it's I see it similar as like, okay, the way we feel influences the way we think, and our the words that we use, and then like our thoughts and the words that we use also influence the way we think, right? And so I can see how the imagination in conjunction with beliefs can also go the same way. It's like we can use our imagination to we can I'm seeing a way that we can use our imagination to influence our beliefs just as much, because it's going to show us what's possible, right? It's within the imagination that we can see what is possible and what's not possible. And really it's through the lens of like, if I can imagine one thing on this end of the spectrum, that means that I can imagine something on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. And so that there can at least be a conversation within that, if you wanted to use that to like boil down on the belief itself. And then like the beliefs, I agree 100%. It's like, yeah, you're wearing the lenses, right? It's like you put on glasses and it shapes how you view the world, or it colors how you view the world. And so it's like you can use, like you're using both to influence the other. Does that make sense? Or does that land for you? What's coming up for you, Grace?
I feel like this is going to be off topic, but I'm
Cool.
like, wait, maybe it's just like the mind that like maybe I'm like kind of combining the imagination and the mind. Like I don't even know what the distinction there would be, and I don't really know how this relates to language. Actually, you know what? How it of course it relates to language, because like of course it relates to language because like I still like think about, or like I don't know, conceptualize of my mind with words. So like of course it relates, but yeah. But yeah, so I was like, wait a second, maybe like imagination just does just follow beliefs, and you're kind of like focusing your mind a different way. You're like when you're changing them. Although like they're all related, so like I don't know. Yeah, they're all connected, of course.
yeah, it's all connected. And I I I imagine I've been where you're at, where it's like there's all this stuff floating around. It's like also checking in too. It's like, cool, is there a part of me that's just trying to make connections here for the sake of trying to understand it, or am I genuinely curious? Right? Like that can be a very important distinction too, because it's like if I'm curious, great. Like I love curiosity. It leads to a lot of great things. And if it's more of like I'm trying to figure this out, that's when it's like, okay, well, there's nothing to figure out. So can I steer this back to um keeping it in the light of making it more playful or more fun, right? Instead of it letting be consuming of like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Sometimes it's not really relevant to
Yeah.
what you're like thinking about or
Yeah.
what you're doing with. So I appreciate that.
Yep. Eric, if you don't have the language to describe it, can you imagine it? Can you imagine what you can't describe? I fucking love that question. My initial stance is that yes, you can imagine it. And I say that through having experienced enough times in my life things that I couldn't put words to. And through that lens, if I experienced it, I have to be able to imagine it. It has to be able to be a thought form for it, right? Whether I'm consciously aware of that or not, like it could be some subconscious stuff. And I say that having I've dabbled with different plant medicines before and some different psychedelics. Like, had some really interesting experiences where it's just like there are no words to describe what I just experienced. And so through the feeling aspect of it, right? Like I imagine, yeah, the other part of that comes up for me is that even if I don't have words to describe it, I imagine there's a feeling that can be associated that is going to be like, yeah, I can't describe this feeling, but there will be that feeling. And so if I can feel something that like through the feeling we can actually create, right? This is like we know this because we hold trauma in the body, right? And so this is why things like acupuncture and different releases can create, right? Or it can bring back like memories from the past, right? Because like that trauma is stored in the body. So if the trauma could get stored in the body, what I'm also curious is that can or is future stuff also stored in the body, and can we access potential by feeling more? That's a fun thing to ponder. That'll be fun for everyone to sit with, or a fun seed to be planted, because that's really cool. Because the way I view it is like, cool, if it exists on one end of the spectrum, it's also going to exist on the other end of the spectrum. So I'm going to sit with that one myself.
Maybe that's where
Has
you like
something to
feel
say.
desire,
Oh,
like
sorry.
and you feel gut instincts. That's where you're like connected to future stuff.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like getting that sensation in the body, and then having having a thought pop up of like exactly desires. It's like, oh, I can like I'm creating the thing that I'm desiring. I'm creating that that picture, that scene. Where did that come from? Right? So it's like, which for me, I like to make things as simple as possible. It's like, cool, if we can learn to feel more in our bodies, I imagine we can gain access to so much more. So that's a fun thought. What you got, Tama?
I had another fun thought. I think also we try to control imagination and we think of it as like a skill or something, which is it is, but I feel like there's a level of imagination that's like very we don't control it and it's very organic. It's like one of those things where you telepathically talk to someone but you didn't know that you were kind of sending messages or whatever. So we might be imagining our possibilities in our future, as you said, in our bodies, or they're stored somewhere as we go. Like our mind is probably in the back of our mind is imagining things that are happening, and through moving them, as you said, through like color puncture or whatever, like these different type of tools that move stuck energy, your imagination starts to work in the background and then starts to make things that are like new, and then you go like, oh my god, how did this happen, how did I meet this person, or how did this thing come about the way I wanted it to? But you did it through your subconscious imagination. So I think I personally think of, because in school and whatever they taught you like, oh, let's be creative, like it's time to be creative. So I think we made it like an action, you know, and it's like, let's do art class now. But imagination is really abstract in our bodies. Yeah.
Yeah,
Another thought.
thank you for sharing. Yeah, what comes up in hearing you say that is, I know Ryan's mentioned this numerous times. It's like trying to fix a feminine energy problem, or it's like approaching a feminine energy with a masculine energy, right? So it's like, get creative. That makes it very masculine versus like, be creative, right? It's gonna be more in that feminine. And um, yeah, I love where this conversation's gone. Thank you guys for sharing. This is fun. I'm glad. What you got, Lucy?
It just keeps bringing up everything you're all saying, is like keeps bringing up things where I'm like, oh my god, yeah. Like just thinking back to when I was at fashion university and just being like, right, it's time to design. Like, let's get your designs down. And it's like, what the fuck? I can't design, like what? And then I'll go to bed and I'll be like legit about to go to sleep, and then I'll be like, oh my god, and then I'll like go write it down, and it just like comes, doesn't it? So
Yeah, no, that's typically that's been my experience, especially lately, is like when I get out of my own way and I allow the things to come through, that's when like it gets so much easier. And something else I wanted to touch upon, like this stuff like really lights me up. I love talking about language and these conversations and like all the connections we're having. One thing that it's really helped me with in like living in this imagination realm conversation, right? Because this seems to be the most like ambiguous one. It's like there's so much that could be going on. You know, the things that we notice help us. It's, you know, helping us gain a little bit more accuracy. It's like, okay, like these are going to be the inarguable things, and then, you know, having another layer of context for feelings, right? It's a little bit more simple. It's like, cool. It's like physical sensations in the body. Like I imagine there is a little bit more than that, and at the same time, it's like, cool, that's something that we can at least grasp and understand enough to be able to operate within those confines, versus the imagination. It's like it can be very ambiguous, can be very big. And what it's done for me is it's made things more fun, more lighthearted, right? And by being more lighthearted, it's made it more fun. And so that's really when like my life started to change. And then like adding on the stuff that we've talked about in the master key, like that really just helped like zone things in for me. But like when I got out of this whole life is super serious and we should approach everything as it's super serious, into like, oh, well, in reality, we're all living in our imagination the majority of the time. And it's like I know enough about how like, yeah, what like how I'm influencing my reality and like how my experience of it and what I'm attracting. It's like you have enough of that to know like, okay, there's a lot more going on here, and why not have fun with it, right? And like in the having fun, you're still going to experience all the stuff that is uncomfortable. You're going to experience the sadness and the anger and whatever. It makes it a hell of a lot easier though to be able to look back on it and laugh than be like, oh, that was so miserable, right? So yeah, I wanted to throw that out there because fun is something that I seek often, and it's made life more enjoyable. What you got, Tama?
I really, really, really liked and appreciate the sentence. I imagine that you're not listening to me, versus I feel like you're not listening to me, because it really, as you said, makes it playful. And I think even when we're conscious and aware that feelings are just feelings and whatever, I think still the word feelings, as you said, going back to the power of language, is still heavy and it's still like very emotional and whatever, just the word. So when you said I imagine, now I'm thinking of the times I imagined my fear. Like just yesterday, I was imagining this whole scenario and it felt like fear, but it was just imagination. And now I look back at it and I was like, huh, that's very light. It's super light. I love it. Like, this is very cool. I want to use I imagine that you are not listening to me more, like that sentence.
Uh, that is, it's the, how do I phrase this? Helping people like just use that simple phrase, I imagine dot dot dot, right? And insert whatever you want. Like giving that to people to play around with is one of my most favorite things to do, because it is such a simple thing and it completely can change the context of whatever it is you're going through, right? With the self, when you're engaging with others, you're trying to connect. Yeah, because like the first thing that comes to mind is if someone were to be like, "Oh, I imagine you're not listening," right? I imagine like one of those scenarios, me being like, "Oh, that's silly. I'm listening. Haha, funny." Right? And it's just like completely diffused. And it's like, cool. What are you feeling? Oh, you're because the story that you were saying was that I wasn't listening, you're now feeling sad. And now the abandonment wounds are coming up or the abandonment beliefs are coming up, right? Like those little things. And so it's like, yeah, it can completely diffuse a situation. And it's like the same thing with I think, right? And so the I feel like is much more impactful. Like when you want to take it a layer deeper, you can start doing the same things with I think, right? Because if it's if I'm thinking it, that means it's a thought. And, you know, for most people growing up, the context is like, oh, like our thoughts are real. And that if I think something, it must be true. Right. Or, you know, something along those lines. Even as you continue to work through it, there is some of that residue left from it. And so, like, when you start to peel that layer back, it's like, oh, I'm just imagining all of this. Like, I'm having thoughts. And instead of saying, I think this, and like, it's even, I even do the same thing with I believe. Like very rarely will you hear me say I believe X, Y, and Z because I've experienced enough in my life to know like every belief that I've ever had has either changed or was in a position to be changed, and I was presented with enough information on the other side to be like, oh wow, like yeah, I did believe that, but now I don't. But then at the same time, right? If I say I believe, people want to or like that ingrained belief is that we can't change our beliefs. It's just what I believe, right? Like how many times like, oh, well, this is just what I think, or this is just what I believe, right? It's like, oh, I believe in God. Well, that's a harder conversation to have with someone versus saying like, oh, I imagine there's a God, or I imagine there's a higher being, right? Now we can have a conversation about it instead of like, no, this is the way it is, and this is my God, and this is how it's like, right? So we can start to see how these simple little things can be brought into our everyday conversations, especially the ones that are already heavy enough, right? We don't need to be adding more to that. Does that make sense?
I have something to add.
Yeah.
I imagine because uh, feelings and thoughts and beliefs feel very real. Like when you're feeling them, like it's like feeling like a hot stove. Like it's there. Like the
Mhm.
fear really exists, but it's not real. But it feels very real. So I think when you say imagine, it's really playful because the imagination, as you said, it's related to children, storytelling, whatever. So imagination never hurt anyone. You know, they say, well, like, oh, imagine, daydream, you know, you're fine. So I think it's because we feel so much and it feels very real. When I'm scared, I feel it. So if I always say that my fear was just an imagination of my mind, then it becomes lighter. Just
Mhm.
adding another
Yeah.
sentence.
Yeah. Are you open to a little reframe on that, Tama?
Sure, yes.
Cool. So you said like these things feel very real. However, it's something I'm imagining. So what I invite you to look at is instead of off putting or instead of pushing like let's say that fear off to the side, what you're feeling is very real, right? Like it is real. It's not right. It's like when what comes to mind is like when someone says like, oh, it's all in your head, right? And so what's really important here is that um acknowledging that it is real. Like, okay, I'm afraid. I understand that that's a story, right? I have this situation, like let's say coming on this call, right? I was experiencing a little bit of nervousness. I could have sat with that and been like, "Oh, I'm not really nervous. I'm actually excited," right? Because like physiologically, nervousness, fear, and excitement, they're all the same thing in the body or close enough. So it's like, okay, if I can change my story around it, I can now tell the story of, "Oh, I feel excited to hop on this call." Cool. And in the beginning, it was nervousness. That was very real. And so, uh, like I said, I do story work as part of my coaching. And what I've found is in the storywork community and in some of these communities I've been in is that people get stuck in storywork, not recognizing that it's simply a tool, right? It's like, okay, if I can use this tool to create a state change, for instance, and then it's like, what do I do with that state change? Whereas most people, if this is the first thing they've ever done, they're like, oh, well, I can storywork anything. And so it's like something comes up and now all of a sudden you're overwhelmed. It's like, oh, I'm going to like, I can change the story. I can, which is very accurate. And so That's actually the word I was looking for. So it's like understanding that the feeling is real, and then what we're trying to do is just gain more accuracy. That's the process. So you feel something, right? And at first you label it as fear, and then you recognize that you're like, oh, okay, this could be a story. That was very real. Everything that you feel, everything that you think, all of that, it is all very real. So we don't want to discredit that. Instead, it's acknowledging that, like, this is where I'm currently at, and then cool, what is more accurate here? Oh, you know what? I'm not afraid. I'm actually very excited. Right? Like, that's very different than saying like, oh, that fear wasn't real. No, the fear was real. Does that make sense?
I guess this goes back to like people escaping their emotions or doing meditation just to not feel.
Yep.
I get the overall, yes, not you have to feel the feeling and accept it, and then
Yep.
know it's there, and then move past by storytelling.
Yep.
Yes, very good point.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, gaining accuracy, it's like I said, it's one of the main things that I tried to do, and like what I've been learning is like, having been someone who's very analytical, intellectual, very up in my head, it's like, cool, I can use that. I can recognize it as a tool that it is to do these things. And so I've been working on like, cool, how can I gain more accuracy while also still being a human being and understanding like, I'm not going to know everything. I'm not going to understand everything. There's been times that I feel things that just don't make sense, and that's okay too. But yeah, if we can gain more accuracy, life does get more fun. Cool. So notice, imagine, feel, right? Talked about the circling thing, or from the Circling Institute, but as we saw, we just magnified that quite a bit, or like, made it a little bit more broad scope. And so I'm going to circle back to those 3 pillars I was talking about before, right? Conflict language versus archetype language. So it's like understanding like, yep, our language is affecting us. The words that we use are affecting us internally, externally. And so it's like starting to see how these things are showing up in our life, right? And so the first one I mentioned is soft talk versus solid talk. So the conflict language would be soft talk, the archetype language would be solid talk. And so soft talk is going to be all of those little fluffy filler words that keep us in indecision. Maybe, kind of, sort of, I might, I could, right? So like when we start to hear this language show up, what it's doing is subconsciously, for the most part, is it's trying to dampen what's really going on here. It's like if you're faced with a decision, for instance, it's like, hey, do you want to go to the gym? You know what? Maybe. I don't know. I kind of do. I kind of don't. Right? Like, the example that we always get and I love is like, imagine someone's coming up to ask you on a date, right? Doesn't matter, man or woman, and they come up to you like, hey, I kind of sort of think you're cute, and do maybe would you like to like grab a drink on Saturday, or if that's cool, right? Like if someone came up to you, like, what would your reaction be, right? It's like, well, this person has no groundedness, like they're all over the place. And it's like, yeah, you might continue to engage with it, but at the same time, it's like, man, like this person, right? If you want to look at it through the lens of like, commitment even, right? It's like those words keep us from committing in a way. And so the other thing that I see it quite a bit in is, like I said, I do some emotional work as well. And so, talking to people about how they feel. It's like, oh, well, I kind of feel this. Well, maybe it's this, right? So it's very out there. It keeps people in indecision. And so you can see how, like, if this is the language that we're telling ourselves, for instance, like we're trying to get back into a fitness routine. It's like, maybe I'll go to the gym later. Maybe I won't. Or I kind of want to do this. I kind of don't, right? Like it's very easy to stay stuck in indecision versus the flip side of that being solid language, or solid talk being the archetype language. It's just very direct, right? It's another way to look at it. It's like, instead of being like, hey, I kind of sort of think you're cute. Do you want to maybe go out, maybe this weekend, maybe not, versus like, hey, I find you attractive. How does drinks at Billy's Pub on Saturday, 7 p.m. sound? Right? Very solid, very direct, very to the point. And so it's like, which one's gonna, like, who do you think is gonna follow through more, right? The person with solid talk or the person with soft talk? Or if we want to use the gym example again, I kind of maybe want to go to the gym. I'm going to the gym Tuesday, 3 p.m. right? It's very direct and it gets you to where you're trying to get. And so same thing, right? Whether you're communicating with yourself or you're communicating with another, and this is also going on in our thoughts too. This isn't just a spoken thing. And so if in your head this is what's going on, this is where it's also going to keep you. Okay, so we have soft talk versus solid talk. Any questions or comments on that? Pretty simple stuff. Cool. So the second one was negations versus affirmations. And so this is really, really simple, right? Negations keep us focused on what we don't want. Affirmations are going to keep us focused on the things that we do want. And so if you find yourself talking about all the things that you don't want, right? We understand enough that if that's what we're talking about, that's where our focus is. If that's where our focus is, we're just going to bring more of that into our life, right? Versus if we focus on the things that we do want, you're going to give a better chance of that of happening and or showing up, right? So it's like, I don't want to fail this test. Cool. What are you focusing on? Failing the test, right? And so it's also through the lens of our brains do not process negations, right? It whatever comes after the negation, don't, won't, can't, stuff like that, whatever comes after that is typically what the brain will focus on, right? So we want to give it something positive to focus on, or at least in the direction that we want to go. So really the simplest one, and it's also one of the more powerful ones, right? Because like all of a sudden people start to understand like, oh wow, I keep talking about all these things that I don't want, and yet I keep having the things show up that I don't want. Oh, that's weird. That's because I keep focusing on it. So it's like, okay, I don't want to fail this test versus I want to pass this test, right? At least that shift in awareness, that shift of focus can make a huge change. And then we can talk a little bit about, we'll play some one word games here at the end as well. But that's going to be negations and affirmations, right? Any questions on those ones?
No question, but it's just interesting about saying, like, I don't want to fail this test, because maybe to many people, including myself, you assume that saying I don't want to fail this test is like a positive thing, but actually when you think of it like this, it's like, wow.
Yeah. What you got, Tama?
And also, like when you say I don't want to fail this test, it's like you're saying, I feel like I'm going to fail this test. Like you're also saying like I want this, or like this is a scenario or a possibility. So it goes back to something Ryan said about like saying I don't want actually means that some part of you wants it.
Yep.
For a weird reason, because I don't know, because of fear or whatever. So it's super powerful, because that means like you're attracting it by saying I don't want to feel it. It means like there's a possibility of you failing it and whatnot.
Yep. What you got, Grace?
Yeah, that's I was thinking about it too, because like if I view everything as like I'm always getting what I want, and I'm like, wait, but I don't actually want some of this, or like some of this isn't like necessarily like desirable or something, then I guess that helps me a lot.
Yeah. And something else that's important to recognize in this as well is that, and I believe Ryan, or wow, I used the word believe. I imagine Ryan has said this before, where it's like the conversation around like, okay, where my focus is, right? That's where the energy is going to go. So it's like, well, I don't want to acknowledge then this like negative thing or this bad thing. You can like, it needs to be acknowledged, right? And I love how Ryan puts it, where it's like, yeah, understand that there is an aspect of you that does want to feel this way. It's something that how that helped connect dots for me is I read a book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And he makes this statement from like using the body as a means of like communicating this message. And so he was talking about how if you recognize that our body wants to like our body wants to exist using the lowest amount of energy possible at all times. And so like with our mind we can change this, but if we were to go into autopilot mode, the body simply wants to survive and it wants you to use the least amount of energy to do so. And so knowing that, and then understanding that, like, the body, right, as a somewhat separate thing for all intents and purposes right now, doesn't have a concept of good or bad, right or wrong, right? These are all stories that we give to things. And so when the body, when you experience an event, right, and this starts as a child, you experience an event, you make it mean something, right? And so you experience dad not picking you up from school, for instance, you now feel, let's say, fear, scared, like not safe, right? However you want to describe that sensation. And then all of a sudden that keeps happening, right? And so when you're put into positions as you continue to move forward in life, and these other experiences happen that trigger something like that, there's an abandonment wound there. It becomes so automatic that it's like, yeah, the body does want to feel that, even though consciously you're like, I'm tired of feeling this way. I want to shift this abandonment story. The body does want to feel that. And so acknowledging that and understanding, like, oh, cool, this is something that's simply happening. I have a choice in whether or not I want to change that. And so, yeah, acknowledge that, and understand that by acknowledging that, you're not like putting that focus and attention into it to have it keep happening more. Like, that experience, that sensation simply wants to be felt and experienced, and then you can move on, right? Or you can start to move forward. And so it's a really simple concept that I love teaching people, is that, like, more often than not, when we're experiencing some sort of overwhelm, or like if sadness keeps coming back or anger keeps coming back, whatever, it just wants to be felt, right? It's just like a little kid throwing a temper tantrum. They want the attention. They want to know that someone's watching them, right? Which is why oftentimes you can just go over and give them a hug. And then all of a sudden they feel better. It's like, okay, I feel seen, heard, supported, whatever. So yeah, that's, yeah, it is really important there to, like I said, you can acknowledge the things that you don't want, right? And choose to focus more on the things that you do want. And so, yeah, if you find yourself like gaining awareness of, like, oh man, I was doing that thing where I was thinking about what I don't want, or I was thinking about what I don't want to happen. It's totally fine. You're not messing anything up. You didn't get anything wrong. It's just, it's coming to the surface to be acknowledged. If you can acknowledge it and be like, okay, cool, thanks. I see why, right? This is a repeated pattern. It's just showing up again. That's cool. Thank you. And then you can then shift your focus, right? And then at the same time, if you're not clear on what you do want, that's okay too. You can also use what knowledge you have of what you don't want to help you gain more accuracy about what you do want, right? Like, if you go out on a date and you meet someone and they act a certain way, and you're just like, whoa, I know I don't want that. Cool. Well, what's something that's opposite of that? Like, oh, this person was very closed off. I don't want that. Okay, cool. So I want someone that's more open. Got it. Right. So we can use the things that we don't want to help us gain context on the things that we do want. What you got, Eric?
Yeah, that reminds me of when you're talking about commitment and the soft talk. It's like, that's like, if you're saying like kind of, and you're not committing to it, then it's almost like you're afraid of exploring those things. And if you don't explore them, then you can't find out whether you want those things or you don't like those things or not. So it's like, yeah, commit to, if you're not sure, then go explore it. Like, commit to exploring it and find out.
Yep. Yeah,
Cool.
it's making, yeah, it's helping people see that often just make the next step, make the next choice, right? Like, we get stuck in like trying to figure everything out. And it's like, what's down the road or whatever. It's like, okay, cool. Now that I have this context on how my language is giving me feedback, right? Like, this is what we're talking about, and especially in these three pillars, right? Talking about what Ryan taps into a lot is like, it's providing us with feedback. So if we can gain awareness around it, it's like, oh yeah, I'm doing that soft talk thing again. Cool. What am I avoiding? Right? Because chances are that's what it is. And it could be, oh, I'm avoiding making this decision. I'm avoiding the potential outcome. And then you can start having, a little bit more fun with like, oh, interesting. Like, yeah, this is actually something that I do want. And I can see how I'm talking myself out of it because I'm nervous, I'm scared, whatever, right? It's like, oh, I have that awareness now. Cool, this is uncomfortable. I can have this conversation. Cool, this is uncomfortable. I can take that next step. It's okay. It's just uncomfortable. It's not the end of the world. So, yeah, love that. Cool. So that's anything else on the negations affirmations topic? Cool. So the last one, projections and reflections. This is yeah, this area tends to get a little bit more interesting, or at least that's been my experience. Especially being in the coaching world, it's understanding like, okay, like I have to have awareness of what's mine and what's not. This is why, you know, with what Ryan's doing, it's great because it's like helping us get more clear on what is ours and what's not, right? And so a projection is any time that you're putting something off of you and onto somebody else or something else, right? Versus a reflection is you're taking that experience and you're making it your own, right? And so this, you know, the most common way that this shows up is you made me feel this way, right? You made me do this, you made me feel sad, insert, you know, whatever you want in there, right? So it's taking something that happened and you're putting off ownership onto another person or another thing, right? Oh, I got fired because of my principal. Oh, I didn't get that job because you know, the interviewer didn't like me. It's like, okay, so instead of like understanding like that's not the case, right? Because no one can ever make us do anything, right? Like, well, for all intents and purposes, we won't go down the rabbit hole of like physical strength or anything like that, but like no one can make you do anything through that sense, especially when we're talking about feelings and through the conversation that we're having. And so instead, right, you can turn around and reflect, right? So it's like, okay, um, for instance, my boss made me do it, right? That's going to be a projection, right? So it's like, okay, I now took the power away from me and I gave it to this person, and now there's a story around like who holds power over me. Versus if you want to turn that around as a reflection, I made me do it, right? And maybe to soften that landing, it might be I chose to do it this time, right? That might be even more accurate, right? But either way is you're taking that projection, something that you're putting off onto this other person, and you're turning around, it's like, cool, where am I responsible for this, right? um it's projections are the number one thing that I've noticed when it comes to people living in a victim mentality. Does anyone know the definition of victim mentality off the top of their head? Cool. I love sharing this one. um it's I going through the master key, this was a huge one for me that I got called out on, and I'm super appreciative that Ryan saw through my shit. And it was also very difficult, especially like, oh, like I coach people on this stuff. And it was also like it really shed light on like, okay, I have a way better understanding of why this stuff is happening in my life. um and so the definition itself, okay, the victim mentality is an acquired personality trait in which a person tends to recognize or consider themselves as a victim of the negative actions of others and to behave as if this were the case in the face of contrary evidence of such circumstances. Um, there's a second part to this. um, that one doesn't have it. One of the main things or in the definition is it's a habitual thought process, and it requires your active participation in the experience, right? So if it's a habitual thought process, we know that we can change that, right? Because we can change our words. Like I just gave you those three pillars, right? Where it's like soft talk, negations, projections, all keeps us in the victim mentality, right? In that victimhood mindset. And so by shifting out of that, right, this is just one of the tools that we can use, right? We're just talking about the like the actual words in this case, while also understanding enough of like, cool, like the words that we're using are also having an energetic difference as well, or an energetic exchange. And so it's like we start to paint that bigger picture. But like these are just some simple ways that we can continue to use or to get more feedback about what we're experiencing. And so who here journals to any degree? Cool. I would say I imagine most people have somewhat of a journaling practice. Journaling is a great way to do this as well. And so, um, depending on the type of journaling that you do, it really doesn't matter. You can start to go back and, I'd be curious for those of you that do have, uh, collections of journals or journal entries, go back and check your language and check your words that you're using and see if it matches up. Like, oh man, like yeah, in this entry, I was having a rough day. And then you look at what you're writing, like, holy crap, like, no one, like, look at the words I'm using, right? And like, that can give us that feedback. And so, Grace, I want to acknowledge you for a couple times now where it's like something's come up and you're like, I don't really know. Like, it's like I could tell that there was some like hesitancy to want to share, right? Because it's like it looked like you were trying to figure it out yourself, and so acknowledging like you did it anyways, like you shared what was there, and so that's like that gives us the best feedback. Oftentimes, is like when something comes up. Like I've gotten really big into verbal processing, and so I've been fortunate enough to have friends in my life that can hold space for me to just word vomit. And then at the end of the word vomit, I'm like, oh, okay, got it. Yeah, now I have way more accuracy. Thank you for that. Versus journaling, for instance. But more often than not, those started as like, I have something to say and I don't know exactly what it is. Like I have these thoughts, I'm trying to make sense of it. I'm like, it's, and typically that would show up as like a lot of soft talk, a lot of negations, a lot of stuff like that. And so now I've been leaning into, it's like, cool, this is uncomfortable. I don't have accuracy. That's okay. As I start to talk, all of a sudden it starts to line up a little bit more, and I end up finding words. And by the end of it, oftentimes I'm like, cool, I actually have the answer that I was looking for. So like lean into that, right? And you can use journaling as a practice, or if you have friends, or if you find yourself in group containers like this where you have the option to express, by all means, like I really encourage you guys to do that. So yeah. Any questions or yeah, what you got, Tama?
I wanted to add a minute ago when you were talking about realizing victim mentality and how it's very evident when I became more accountable for myself. I realized how many people around me are saying things that are like, oh yeah, I had to take the vaccine because my boss told me. And like they're fully in it. And I know because like just a couple of months ago, I had like this type of thing where I was like, can I actually control the situation or not? But it's crazy how more and more I'm seeing like, oh, I had to live in this house because of this. And you know what? It's fine. Like it's all done. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, it's crazy. It really is.
Yeah. And like, yeah, this is all stuff that like we've been experiencing our whole lives and just simply didn't have context or awareness around, right? Yeah, it's very empowering to recognize like when you have like you are choosing, right? It's a choice. And so it's like that can be very empowering, and it can also be very jarring, right? Like when I got called out on like the belief around like someone, waiting for someone to come save me and like just being in that victimhood, like initially it was very difficult. It's like having to accept of like, okay, I'm in this very undesirable situation and I am to blame, right? And it's not necessarily blame. It's like, okay, yeah, I made these decisions, but it's like first I have to accept that, and then it's like, oh wait, cool. So since I was in a position to choose this, that means that I can also put myself in a position to choose the thing that I do want, and it can be as simple as making a choice. So, yeah, it's helping people feel empowered. It's a fun thing to do. Cool. Anybody else got any questions or comments on what we just talked about with that language stuff?
It was just kind of funny because I thought since like this whole session, coming into it, it's like, hi, how are you? Like Ryan brings it up in the past about saying, how are you? As if there's like, so it's just funny. I just thought about that because I'm pretty sure I said that as soon as I came into the session.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, thanks
And
for
it's such
sharing.
like a habit, it's just like, you just say it. You don't even consider the words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's when I really took root in all of this. I'd done a couple different workshops and spent some time with the guy I was mentoring under. It was difficult in the beginning. to like learn how to like communicate in this new way. And then not only was it difficult for me, like understanding like, okay, I've been doing things a certain way for so long, like, okay, I get to break these habits. And then also like learning to be with the other person on the receiving end of that. Because oftentimes like this level of communication, just they've never experienced it before. And so they're like, they don't know what to do sometimes. So it's like learning to navigate how that works too. Like I found this to be particularly true in the dating world, where getting on the dating apps, for instance, and like asking women questions, oftentimes like they didn't know what to do. They're like, this person's showing interest in me. I had one person, they're like, I feel like you're investigating me. And I'm like, I'm just asking questions and getting curious. That's all, but like people aren't used to that. And so like there was one girl I went on a date on. She's like, honestly, the main reason why I did this was because you asked good questions. And then that led to, great conversations. I was like, cool. Like if we can, change this communication thing, and it's like, you see it all over the place, right? This is why, politics are a disaster. Like you turn, like if you were to like look at any news articles, like this shit shows up everywhere. And it's like, no wonder people are so afraid, right? It's like, these are like, look at the language we're using. So yeah, it's a fun process. So when you start to go down the rabbit hole, cool. So those are the two main things that I wanted to cover. So I notice, I imagine, I feel, and then those three pillars of archetype language, right? And so just tying that into the victim mentality, and then yeah, we've covered a broad spectrum of like, cool, here's our language, here's what it encompasses. Like look at how this is affecting how we show up in the world. Look how this is affecting how we experience the world around us. So yeah, is there any questions or comments about anything that we've talked about so far? What you got, Tama?
Thanks for adding another layer of awareness. Now I have to focus on my physical awareness and my language awareness. I'm not complaining. I'm just laughing, but it's just that it's going to be on my mind. Like, this is definitely going to be like, why did I just say that word the way I said it? Very cool. Thank you so much. That was an awesome session.
Yeah, you're welcome. What you got, Grace?
Yeah, I really appreciate this. Is like bringing up for me again just my the part of me that's an absolute control freak in like all the areas of my life, and like this keeps coming up, but for me to learn like how to trust myself, like again and again, like no, like I can trust myself. I can trust that like I have exactly what I need to say, and if something doesn't go in the way that I want it to, I can adjust next time. And that's not because I said something wrong, but because like if I choose ahead of time that everything I'm saying is the right thing. And so yeah, this just brought that up again. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, I really appreciate this conversation and talking to all of you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Tama, you said something that reminded me of another one-word game that I play, and so here's another one for you guys to chew on. When the appropriate time to use the word and versus but. Okay, and so to give you some more context on that, if I were to say, here's a good one. I grew up playing baseball, and so there's a story around not being good enough. So what I would get from my dad, for instance, was, Sean, you pitched a great game, but you could have done better. Right? So it's like, I pitched a great game, but that wasn't good enough. Right? Versus, hey, Sean, you pitched a great game, and I noticed that, in this inning you could have done this. Cool. I get acknowledged for pitching a great game, and then it's like, cool, like we're still able to hold that, and then I can add on top of that. Versus more often than not, when we use the word but, we're completely discrediting the sentence that we just said. And so super impactful when you're communicating with other people, right? So like, as you saw, like this is what my dad said to me. It's like, oh, I pitched a great game, but, and like as soon as you hear the word but, right, everyone just wants to go like, oh, great. Like, here we go again, right? It's like, oh, last night was so fun, but, and it's like, ah, crap, what did I do? Versus like, yeah, you want to like acknowledge the first part, right? Last night was great. And I was hoping we could have done this. Way different than last night was great, but I was hoping we could have done this, right? And so like just another example of like you switch one word, changes how that lands, right? And that can change the trajectory of what goes on next. So yeah, I love the one word game. What you got, Lucy?
And it keeps it on this kind of, instead of it being like, but oh no, it's like and then it feels in, to me it feels I'd imagine it feels enthusiastic, you know, and what possible, you know, the possibility of what can be next time.
Yep. What you got, Taya?
I was thinking, also being a control freak sometimes, the idea of like not to have negative thoughts. And I think this came up on the first master key that I joined with you guys. When Ryan was talking about beliefs and thinking about what you want, and my first thought was like, how am I supposed to think about all the things that I want in a positive way when I have to think about all the dangerous things that are going to happen, because I have to think of every scenario so it doesn't happen, which literally keeps, like, I could be the same person and, like, you know, it's nutty. It feels nutty.
Yep.
So there was I don't know if it was a question or a comment, but when you were saying we get like the focus of like positive to say what we want, I lost my train of thought a little, but I just wanted to, okay, I'm wondering, is it just a practice? Like, I almost want to do an experiment. Like, what if for 1 week I only say what I want? And does that change anything? Or like, is it really scary to not focus on the things that I don't want? You know, because that test example, I studied for a board exam for 11 months and I was thinking, oh my God, I don't want to fail. Don't want to fail. I failed by like a 0.00%. And it was so true. I was just like, oh my God, I don't want to fail, even though I said like I would have posts like I want to whatever. So yeah, I'm curious if it's just a practice.
Yeah.
Like an evidence practice.
Yeah. So I heard two questions in there, or like one question and one might have been more of a statement. Yeah. So if you were to focus on saying simply the things that you do want, yeah, I really do imagine that you would see more outcomes that reflect that. And something to recognize in this as well is there's a difference between, so there's the whole positive thought mind or movement, right? Where it's just like, just think positive. It's a bunch of bullshit. Yes, you know, like outside of the context of like what's positive and what's negative, like if you put that off to the side where it's like, okay, let's look at it as like, instead of think positive, how about let's focus, like let's think about what we do want or focus on what we do want versus what we don't want, right? And so, yeah, if you were to focus on what you did want and you used your language to reflect that, your results would start, or like your experience would start to show that more. And if you have a subconscious belief, for instance, that you can't get what you want, that you will never have what you want, you can say all the positive things all you want, and until you address that underlying subconscious belief, chances are you're going to either get mixed results or you'll see less of the results, right? If you were to focus on what you do want. And so what happens is I focus on what I want and I don't get it. So I reinforce the story of I'm never going to get what I want, only because that's been the underlying belief the entire time. And so you can't trick the, like, you can use it to help influence. And until you start to see more clearly what the limiting belief is, like I said, you're either going to get mixed results or you're going to see less of the results, as opposed to if you truly believe, you're like, oh yeah, I absolutely can get whatever it is that I want, or whatever the story is, and then you use your language. Now you're amplifying that. But if the underlying story is like, I will never have what I want, then you're going to set yourself up to experience that in your reality. And so um the other part that I heard was, or am I just scared to not focus on the things that I don't want? Something along those lines is what you said. And yeah, that right there is giving you the feedback that you need to take another step forward in that. Recognizing, like, there's an aspect of me that is afraid to stop, or is afraid to focus on what I do want, because I've done this for so long. I know what this is. This is comfortable. It's like being comfortably uncomfortable, right? It's like you already know the outcome. This is the story. This is the belief that has been playing day in and day out, or week in, week out, however long. And so, yeah, you get to acknowledge, like, yeah, there is a part of me that is not wanting to give that up. And that's okay. Like, you now have that awareness. And so the way that I typically look at it is like, cool, I know that if I keep doing this thing, I already know what the outcome is going to be because I've been living it my entire life. Okay, cool. Well, now I have a choice. And this is exactly what happened in one of Ryan and I's exchanges, where I got triggered. It brought up this very distinct feeling. I was like, I know exactly what this is. I've been here before. And, like, rather than reacting, so here's a fun one for you guys. The difference between reacting and responding. 10 seconds. If you're reacting, chances are you're reacting and the old patterns are going to show up, right? And this is typically when we're triggered, right? And so does everyone understand what I mean by triggered? Enough of a cool. So yeah, like when we're triggered, if it's that immediate, you're reacting, chances are you're acting out of pattern. If you get triggered and you're able to take a couple breaths and wait at least 10 seconds, that means you have enough awareness to know that you're triggered, for one. And then two, whatever comes after that is going to be a more accurate response, or like you have more control over that response. And so, yeah, like for you, Taya, like understanding, like, cool, I'm acknowledging that there's a part of me that is afraid to let go of this old part of me. I would call that like an identity, right? You have this identity around wanting to focus on all these other things, right? So yeah, like now the next time this happens, you have a new awareness, even if it's just a slightly deeper level of awareness, where it's like that thing happens and you can be like, oop, oh man, I'm thinking about what I don't want again. Interesting. Take a deep breath. I typically go for like 3 breaths just to calm down. It's like, okay, I already know how this works. If I keep doing this, I already know the outcome because this is what I've been doing. Cool. What if I choose to respond in a different way? Right? And this is exactly what I did with Ryan. I wanted to rebuttal. I literally sat for 4 hours, like typing out responses and then deleting it, typing out responses and then deleting it for like 4 hours. I was like, I can't believe this is happening. And then it dawned on me. I was like, wait, I've been here before. I know what's happening. Okay, well, if I do what I'm trying to do, which is to have this like perfect response, I already know how this is going to work because I've done this before and it never works out. All right, I'm just going to assume he's right in this. As soon as I made that choice, everything changed. Everything changed because I had enough awareness of like, oh, here's Sean showing up in pattern. He's triggered. I want to do this thing, but I already know how that's going to go. And I clearly don't want that because I still find myself being like, oh, I hate being in this thing. So I made a different choice. And so, yeah, it was super uncomfortable, and I'm alive. I didn't die. Here I am. Like, oh man, right? And so, cool. I couldn't have done that without that level of awareness. And so, like, here's an opportunity for you, Taya, where it's like, yeah, when that happens again, it's like, cool, I can keep choosing to do this. And if I keep choosing to do this, I already know what the outcome's going to be. Is this the outcome that I want? Like we can make this process that simple, right? It's a choice. And so on top of all that, the other answer in the question I heard is like, yeah, this is all simply a practice. And it's okay. Like, it took me, I did some work about 3 years ago, went to a retreat, a lot of inner child work and healing work, stuff like that. There was stuff it took me almost 2.5 years to really integrate. And being in the master key, especially the second round, like Ryan helped me see just how much I was keeping myself from integrating a lot of the stuff that had already come up to the surface. I had all the opportunities over those last 2.5 years, and Ryan helped me see, like, dude, you're still living in your victim story. Like, you're waiting to be saved. I was like, cool, right? Insert shame and guilt. Here I am. I've done this work. I've been doing it for 2.5 years, almost 3 years, right? And it's like, oh, it's okay. Yeah, it's a practice. And as soon as I made that choice, that whole interaction, like the last 2 months, or I can't remember how long it's been since that last call, almost 2 months. Completely different. The way that I've been showing up in my life since then is way different. And that was because, like, yeah, there were some things that it took me a lot more practice to really dial in. And so it's like, like, we teach in one of the programs that I used to help with, we help online coaches. And so what we teach them is be a white belt, right? So go do new things, go do things that you suck at, because guess what? You're going to have to practice it, and you get to be a beginner again. And it's okay. Like, that's where this can start becoming fun, is when you start to recognize, like, oh, I can give myself grace and compassion through this all. I have all these different tools. I have like this new context, these new lenses, and yeah, it's all practice, right? So it's like, how do I want to show up in it? How do I want this experience to be? How does that land for you, Taya?
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
It also just reminded me, like, when we circle back to the beginning, we're talking about imagination. It's like, when we're a kid, we usually imagine like the most wonderful, magical, amazing things. And then someone says, like, a dream on, you get a little older and you're like, oh, stop dreaming, or dream on, stop like imagining. And then, like, I was like, what if anxiety is just like the imagination? I think we all like touched upon this, just a bunch of fear that you've imagined. Like Tama was saying, like, it's like the opposite of being a kid when you imagine all the magic. So yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for sharing.
My God, this is mind-blowing. Sorry. Anxiety is the adult version of imagination, but inverted. Like, that's so just sad and negative, but like
it's the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Like, you have fun, magical, like childlike imagination, and it's like adult anxiety.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, I was having like a huge realization.
Yeah, no. Totally.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, that I would have labeled myself as a highly anxious person, someone who suffered from anxiety for a good chunk of my life. And then once I started doing this work, I was like, oh, anxiety is actually just this felt sense in the body, which is, high heart rate, maybe some like pressure in the head. Oh, I'm experiencing this because of the story that I'm telling myself around this experience. Got it. Right? Those simple little shifts. So yeah, I love that you guys were able to start connecting those dots. I love it. Yeah, guys, this is a practice. All of this, all the stuff that Ryan gave us, whatever you've learned in any part of this developmental or experiential healing journey of yours, like, it's all a practice. One thing that I live by now is, like, I can't get this wrong, and I use can't consciously because it just sounds like, to me, it sounds fun. It's like, I can't fuck up, because there is no right way to do this and there is no wrong way to do this. So it's like, knowing that, like, yeah, like, this is why having fun, and like, I encourage you guys, if you're not already, like, find something that like lights you up and is super fun. One thing that I've found recently through one of my friends is hacky sack, foot bag. Like, that little thing, ever since I got reintroduced back to my life almost 20 years later, since the last time I've kicked one around, I've completely changed. I'm doing things that I didn't know were possible because like, and I really do attribute a lot of that. I'm having so much more fun now. And so it's like, right, all these different tools, the language, the this, the that, like there's still the human experience part of it. And like having fun is such a great way to really continue the growth. And, you know, as a reminder, you can have fun and still feel sad, mad, angry, upset, confused, frustrated. Like that's all part of the spectrum. Like you can have fun in that too. And so it's like what I used to label as anxiety or depression, I now have a different lens of it. And now when I experience it again, I go, oh, that thing's happening. That's okay. There's still times where like my mind just races. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. Doesn't matter how much I change my language or what words I use. Like sometimes that is simply the experience, and that's okay too. Like the things that used to take me weeks or months to be with, I can now move through in a matter of hours or days. Right. And so like that's what the practice does, is like we're continuing to refine what our experience is. And this is like, I've loved the master key for that, is like Ryan has given us so much. And what I see him doing is just like, cool, like we're starting to fine tune, find more accuracy. And, you know, one of the biggest things is like discerning like what's mine and what's not. What is my experience? Can I trust it? Right? Can I show that trust in it? And then like from there, yeah, life changes. Right? It starts to get I mean, whatever you want it to be. If you don't want it to be fun, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be fun. Being fun's cool though. Anything else? Like I could keep talking for a while. How's we'll wrap this up though. I actually do have something coming up here in about 10 minutes. So I'm curious, is there anything else that has come up for you guys? Questions, comments, insights, dots connected, any of that fun stuff? Everyone good?
I mean, I just really liked finding in the idea of the soft words,
Mhm.
and just kind of realizing that it's just better to make a commitment and to explore things rather than, you know, wait or not explore them just because I'm unsure. So
Yep.
I thought that was, yeah, really helpful.
Cool. Love that. What you got, Grace?
Yeah, I really relate to that. I was just thinking there's this word I used so much. It's like it's like, oh, I just something something, and it's like underlying that it's like an excuse for like not measuring up in some way, or like not being good enough in some way. And it's just really subtle, like, and but I'm realizing that I like use that a lot to just explain how I'm feeling or something. And sometimes like it minimizes it too, because yeah, it's interesting. So
Yeah. Same thing. One word game, right? Just it was just one cookie. Way different than saying like I had a cookie. Right? Like
right, I'm like not owning it.
yeah, you're trying, it's the same, it's almost, it's similar to a projection in the sense of like you're avoiding something. I was just this. And so it's like, as you say just, you like kind of push yourself away from it, versus like I ate the damn cookie. Right? Or it's, you know, yeah, these are all stories. It's funny that you say that you actually had the awareness yourself, because like I was hearing that, and I was going to say something about like how the difference between using the word just. And so I'll give you guys one other area of the language stuff. It's called binary language. And so it's the ends of the extreme. Always, never, right? All the time, never, or none of the time, right? The more that we can avoid that, the better, right? So the difference being, right, we're all in this like personal development, healing, all that stuff. And so when we identify limiting beliefs, right, oftentimes we don't hear it right away. However, working with someone, or like as you gain more context around it, oh, this always happens to me. It's like, every single time this happens to you. Every single time that you've applied for a job, they said no. Well, no, you know, I've had 4 or 5 different jobs. Like, okay, so this doesn't happen to you every time. This happens, what's more accurate? Sometimes. You know, you can even like, is there a difference for you guys in saying like, oh man, like this happens every time versus this happens most of the time, or this has happened a lot in the past, right? So you can see how, like, even through that, when we start using binary language, same thing, it's going to keep you stuck somewhere. Or like, I never get the good things. Like, I can never catch a break. Well, yeah, if that's the story you keep telling yourself, like, guess what? You're going to keep getting more of that result. So like, binary language is another one. So always, never, stuff like that. Yeah, you'll notice too. I mean, there's definitely been times throughout this call where sometimes I was speaking a little bit faster, sometimes I wasn't. As you start to gain more of a context around this whole language saying and what words you're using, notice if it helps you slow down, or notice, get curious about other people. Like, if you're talking to them and they're talking really fast, that's feedback, right? As you start to gain, like, when there's when there's ambiguity, higher energy, right? That's where, like, a lot of, like, the anxiety can start to come in, like the elevated heart rate stuff. Is when there's ambiguity and you're left to your own thoughts about what's really going on here. That's when a lot of that stuff will happen. And so you'll notice people start to talk faster, or something triggers them, or something doesn't sit well with them, they'll start to talk faster. Versus when you find people who can talk slowly and deliberately, and it not be like robotic, right? There's a difference between, like, constantly trying to choose the right thing to say versus, oh, I can slow down my rate of speech, I can get more accurate, take a little bit more time, right? These are all things that are going to influence how we're showing up, how people receive us, stuff like that. So yeah, another fun little one. Awesome. Anything else, guys? Got a few more minutes. Anyone else want to share anything that came up for them? Sweet. Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna stop the